Let's find out.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Kalispera. Kan du se att du så kan Nej, jag får se så kan jag inte. Ta var lite på after då. Ja. Hallå. Ja. That's what the master. 1, 2. Jonathan?
And zero. Yeah, zero. Okay. So we're doing this as a, I mean, it's a test. It's not. It's a bit of a test for our new institute. We're slowly getting ready for the official opening that will be in the spring. But we have to start somewhere. We have to start getting things going, and so this is a good opportunity here tonight with my good friend. Jerry Schaus here in Athens. It was the perfect occasion to start our indoor lectures. Now, we see that this works, the microphone works, eh, Jonathan? I hate this thing.
And now we'll try without the microphone. Everybody can hear me? So it's a great pleasure, c'est un très grand plaisir de vous accueillir ce soir. Monsieur l'ambassadeur, merci d'être parmi nous. Thank you being with us this evening. I asked Jerry during the weekend, said, Jerry, could you send me a short biography to have, to do some? Then after I said, well, I've known this guy for years. But I'm always impressed by what friends and colleagues, Canadians, working in Greece, publish, what they do. It's a lot of work. It's enormous over the years, and everyone, scholars working on the archaic period of Greece, know Jerry as a top-notch specialist of East Greek pottery, but not only of East Greek pottery, because he's published Laconian a lot. He's published, I like the term of these non-Attic wares. It's a non-Attic and non-Corinthian in some way wares. And Jerry has made his career with this, and he's very well known. And I'd say that maybe the best example of this is his recent publication of the Laconian and Chian fine wares pottery from Miletus in Turkey. And I say this because Miletus is a very big excavation. This is one of the major excavations in the Mediterranean, and they have a very good team of very competent people, and so that they have asked Gerald Schaus to publish this material. It gives you an idea of the quality of work he has been doing and of his career. Jerry was studied at this I learned this, Jerry, sorry, in Nova Scotia at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia, where he did his BA and his MA. He did his PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. He did his whole career as professor at the University of Wilfrid Laurier University in Ontario. He started in '78. He he became Professor Emeritus in 2016. He passed many years in Athens, and when I first met him, he was at the American School. What were you at the American School?
In 86, 87 as the Whitehead research professor.
And I remember his wife and you talked to you.
Very small.
Yeah, that was really fun. So he went on. I remember his work on at Cyrene in Libya, and his publication of the non-Attic, at least at the East Greek Laconian and wares from Cyrene. I didn't know that he had published a Corpus Vasorum of the University of Pennsylvania Museum collection. And then he went up working at Stymphalia for many years with Hector Williams and others. And many fieldwork projects in Italy, Greece, of course, in many years. I remember those stories at Mytilene and Erosos, in Turkey, of course, in Crete, in his early years at Gornia, and I saw his work was asked to work in Romania, and he's working a bit in Arkadia, which is we're very happy to have him with us up north also. So it's a great pleasure to have him as our first lecturer here at the new Canadian Institute. But there's also another reason. It's because he worked so hard to get this institute and to have it as it is now, that it was for me difficult to imagine to have someone else than Jerry have in some way the opening lecture here at the Canadian Institute. So it's really a great pleasure for me to have him with us this evening. Jerry, it's all yours.
So Jonathan, I've turned this on. Okay, we'll try it. If the volume is too loud, I can always move it or take it off, okay? Thank you very much, Jacques, for the invitation. Thank you for the warm words. It's been many years. I remember very, very fondly a dinner that you hosted in Schaus. You want me to take this off? Shall I take it off? Let's take it off. Yeah. He's laughing. Okay, we'll try it just one more time, and if it causes problems, then I will take it off. Okay. I remember very fondly a dinner that Jacques hosted in Thasos when my wife and our two little boys at the time, and my parents, were doing a little bit of a tour around northern Greece. And it was such a wonderful evening of laughter and wine and wonderful fish dinner. And at the end of it, I wanted to pay for everything because there were 6 of us and only one of Jacques. And Jacques insisted on paying for it in a typical Greek way, hosting us. And I remember it very well, and I'm very thankful for all these years of friendship, Jacques. It's been a wonderful ride. Jacques was one of the former directors of the Institute back in the late 80s and early 90s. And we have another former director with us as well, David Rupp. David was particularly important in us buying the first apartment on Iginitu Street. He found it and then did the work necessary to purchase it and get the money together. Thanks as well to Stymphalia Constantinides, whom we mentioned already this evening. Thanks also to Don Matthews and Ian Miller, who were here for a while, but they didn't want to stay because they're very concerned about their health. And that's a shame, but I'm going to get together with them on Wednesday and tell them a little bit about the cave then. Ian and Don are wonderful supporters of the Institute, and it was nice that they came to watch the unveiling of the plaque at shortly after 6 this evening. So it was a special moment for me as well. The donor plaques are now up, I see, and I hope that you take a look at them and recognize the names of the people who have donated money for some of these important rooms just on this floor. Dr. Ian Begg, the longtime editor of the Canadian Institute's bulletin, gave a wonderful donation for the renovations and of this auditorium. So we have to recognize him. And the other rooms on this floor were a donation of Elaine Godwin, who truly has been a wonderful supporter of the Institute once she became a board member, and she's a very close friend of mine. But I also have to mention Bob Peck and Maria, who likewise have been very, very generous donors for the Institute, and even more important in the long run, Bob has used his wonderful contacts amongst the Greek Canadian community and brought on board really important donors, including Hellas Gold and the Hellenic Heritage Foundation, and now also the Miracopoulos family. So, Bob, it's wonderful that you could be here. Maria, thank you also for coming. It's a moment that you and I can savor particularly. I remember having dinner with you after an event of the Canadian Institute at the Italian School. Maybe it was a conference event. You and I sat beside each other and we more or less dreamed that one day Canada, the Canadian Institute, would have its own building. So here it is, and it's a moment really to savor. David, not only did you find that first apartment for us, but you also found this building for us and negotiated the sale, and you also pushed us as a board. And the time when I was the president, you were pushing to see this building renovated the way it is now. My vision was buy it and move right in. And you saw a much greater project having it look the way it does now. So, David, this is a feather in your cap, to be sure, and much appreciated.
You're here.
50 years ago at Dalhousie University, I was a senior taking a seminar course with a very dear professor, Professor Eric Sagelberg. The topic was patristics, but it really didn't matter so much. I simply enjoyed his company. He was much more than a professor, he was a mentor. And in that class, there was one other person. There was just the two of us. A recent immigrant to Canada from Greece, who had first come to Toronto and then to Halifax. He was teaching in the Greek school in Halifax. and he wanted to further his education. He had an education degree from the Morazlion, which everyone knows about who's been around the American school. But he also, sitting in his class, appreciated this professor that we had, and he and I became good friends. Over the years, we've seen each other many times. He returned to Greece and continued his pursuit of a position, an academic position here in Greece, and eventually became a professor of pedagogy in the Faculty of Education at the University of Athens. His family, well, I attended his wedding. He has the same number and gender of children as I do, 2 boys and 2 girls. And this summer, his younger daughter was married on the very same day that my second grandson was born. So our lives have interwoven in many ways, and it is really a pleasure to have him here this evening to once again share a classroom together. We were just young and kind of naive students with no great ambition 50 years ago, but we've both come a long way and enjoyed the journey. So Elias Matsagouris, Professor Matsagouris, so nice that you could join us this evening. It's been a good trip. So my topic, I should say that in some ways it occurred to me that it would be nice to have a motto for the Canadian Institute, and if we were to have a motto, maybe something nice and simple like to save and to, I'm taking this off. Is that all right? Yeah. Right, let's see if I can. There. Liberated. Okay. Okay, is that okay? To save and share. Now, I thought to myself, to save, well, a good part of the work of the Institute is recovering aspects of the knowledge of Greek culture and history, to recover it and to preserve it. And the other aspect, to share, is what we're doing here this evening. That is, we are sharing the information that we've gathered, and believe me, the Canadian Institute is just a very small cog in this larger educational endeavor to preserve Greece's past. But it certainly is important for the Canadian Institute to have a part in this, to recover and to preserve, to share through publication, through educational programs, which we are hoping to continue here, publication and lectures and all kinds of events that somehow help Canadians, as well as people from other nationalities, learn about the Greek past. What I'm going to do, though, this evening is to share some things with you about the destruction, the current destruction of Greek cultural patrimony in the area where I'm working in Stymphalia. It's not just annoying or frustrating, it is shocking what can happen in the course of a year. So that's what I'm going to be showing you, and I hope that what you'll take from this is that this is happening all around Greece. it's not just in Stymphalis, and that all of us have to be aware and do our best to stop the destruction and preserve as best we can those aspects of Greek cultural history. Okay, so with that, let's see if this laptop works. Oh, that's a good sign. Good. So, my topic is going to focus on a looted cave sanctuary high above Stymphalia in Arcadia. But I'm also going to start by showing you some things about our site where we've been working since, excavations since 1993. I'm going to turn this off because it's disturbing. Okay, let's try it without it, and I'll raise my voice a bit. Okay. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, Stymphalis is located in northeastern Peloponnese. It's actually in Arcadia, but very close to the borders of Achaia, that is the city-states along the north coast of the Peloponnese, and also quite close to Corinth, which is located just off the map here in this direction. So Sicyon is here, and there are these Arcadian and nearby city-states all around it, including Phenios and Caphii, Orchomenos, Alea, and Phlius. But the focus of this talk will be a cave that's located more or less in the midst of these city-states on the slopes of Mount Oligyrtos. So it's important just to get an idea of the geography, and it's also important to note that this is in the midst of the Arcadian mountains, and these individual city-states really are focused on valleys that are surrounded by these mountains and so somewhat isolated. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Here's the site that we've been working on, Stymphalis, famous for the connection with Heracles and one of his labors, the killing or the scaring, if you're an environmentalist, of the birds in this valley that seem to have been numerous and perhaps dangerous. You can see the lake here, which is in the best of times full and a real attraction for wildlife and bird life. Unfortunately, this year there is no Lake Stymphalis. It's gone. It's completely dried up. You can walk across it, and it's partly due to the amount of water that's being funneled off for irrigation down on the coast, Corinthia and Sicyonia, and it's partly due to less rain for the past year. The springs are all dried up. There's no water flowing through them. And so it's sad. The fish that are native to the lake, well, some people believe that the fish can actually scoop out a sort of ditch for themselves in the mud and survive through this. Personally, I find that hard to believe. You can't hear the frogs. I haven't seen a snake. I have seen a couple snakes, but everyone is hurting. The one bit of good news is the jackals are back. And if you have never heard the cry of a jackal, it is like, I think it's like a tomcat on the prowl at night and meeting a rival. you know, the screeching of that, the jackals have returned to the valley. Anyway, this is our site. Hector Williams has been working here doing a resistivity magnetometer survey going back to the 1980s, and then we started digging in the mid-1990s. I've focused my attention on this sanctuary, the Acropolis sanctuary up here, and it's located here on the plan. And this just gives you an idea of the limits of the ancient city. So this gives you an idea of how it looks if you were flying over it in a kite, or these days I suppose a drone. But this is a kite picture, and I owe this to Ben Gurley, who acted as our architect back in the 90s. And here you see another view of it up on the Acropolis. The very height of the Acropolis is up here. So it was not really a surprise when Anastasius Orlandos identified this sanctuary as one belonging to Athena Polias, Athena the protectress of the city, because it is located up on an Acropolis. There is also this representation in Olympia. If you've seen the metapiece of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, you see Athena sitting on a rock looking towards Heracles as Heracles brings a couple of dead birds to her. She doesn't seem particularly interested in the birds, but she's sitting on a rock, and it always seemed to me that it's much like sitting on the Acropolis at Stymphalia waiting for the birds to be brought to her. I'll tell you though that here's a kind of reconstruction. It's a very small, simple temple, probably not even columns at the front. A little set of stairs going up just to the door, and right beside it, well, I'll show you another picture in a moment. A little house here, which Orlando's identified as a priest's house, a small altar, and then back in the back here, a really kind of surprising discovery, but maybe it shouldn't have been for an Arcadian city. So we didn't find anything at the sanctuary that dated any earlier than 500. In fact, most of the material does not date before 400. And the reason we think is because Pausanias says that there was an old Stymphalis, some other place, and that the Stymphalians moved to this new site. He doesn't give a date, and all we can do is speculate based on the finds that we have made in the sanctuary and in the lower town site that it probably occurred sometime around 400. Well, here's this object that we found. Actually, all we found was this little base with a round cutting, but it must be the place for a periranterian, so that before you walk in up the stairs and into the temple, you had a chance to ritually purify yourself by washing perhaps your face and your hands at this periranterian. And inside, this is again just our artist's reconstruction, Susan Wood, who's also been a great donor and a supporter of our work at Stymphalis, also our illustrator. So she gives this as an impression of what it was like to walk into that temple, and I'm going to show you the surprising finds, particularly because Orlando said that he only had one other part of the sanctuary to dig, and so he came back in 1926 and dug that last part, and that's when he found this inscription. And so when we went to the sanctuary, we thought he had dug everything and all we would be doing is looking at his backfill. The very first day we realized that that was not the case, because we found that a very unusual but very fragmentary archaic core. So you can see where the pieces fit. There's a big leg piece, there's a big arm piece, interesting piece here, but lots of the drapery. And so this is how we reconstruct it. And in her hand, this core holds, here's the reconstruction, a baby hare. And as Nora recognizes from a visit that she made to our sanctuary just a few days ago, I didn't mean malia, something from your hair, but in fact a rabbit. So a baby rabbit in her hand. So this was a surprise, especially if we're dealing with a kind of a protectress goddess like Athena. Then we also found this baby, kind of a temple boy. Once again, very fragmentary, but enough for us to do a kind of reconstruction. And this just gives you an idea of how this looked when it was whole, but probably without the drapery. So a temple boy in this temple, statue of a Kore with a baby rabbit. It's not really fitting very well with what we expect for Athena Polias, despite Orlandus's discovery, which unfortunately is lost. He put it for safekeeping in a house in the village of Kionia, gave us the name of the owner, and we haven't been able to locate it. But he did do a very good drawing of it. Well, the issue is that since Orlandus's time, in fact, really quite recently, working with some of our finds in the library, suddenly it seemed not to be Athena Polias, but another deity. So here's a Corinthian red figure shirt with the last letters, Ithu, I. Here a silver coin with a couple of letters punched into it. And here most clearly this bronze rim that says Elethu. So it seems in fact that we have more dedications to Elethea, this goddess of childbirth, of child upbringing, rearing. And that fits more nicely with the statues. So I think personally, I'm leaning towards it being a temple and a sanctuary more dedicated to Elethea than to Athena Polias. So this is the family of the hotel, well, the hotel family, where we were staying this year. And here Lavinia, who is a colleague of ours from the project, and a very welcome addition to our team. She came a couple of years ago as well, and wonderful to have you back again, Lavinia. So, talking about sharing, Leonidas, a wonderful name for a hotel owner, Leonidas, here, brought his 4 children so that they could have a tour of the site to see what work we had been doing. So this exercised the limits of my Greek, believe me, but Lavinia was close by to help me out when I was really stuck. So we took them around the site, and Leonidas, in fact, recorded this whole thing so that he could play it back for his wife and for the children. So here we are exploring some of the antiquities at the lake. As I said, it's just totally dry. There's not a drop of water there. And here I'm sharing some of the pictures in the book that we published on the Stymphalis sanctuary. He's got his cell phone out and he's recording everything. Look at how attentive they are. They're just wonderfully behaved. If it were my kids, they'd already be wandering away. But in the midst of this tour, we saw some of the destruction that's been going on at the site. And it included vandalism of these signs, very well constructed signs describing some of the areas that we excavated back in the 1990s. This is a housing area with plans and so on. Here's another of these things that have been deliberately destroyed. Nearby, a farmer has decided to, because it's dry this year, to plow this area around the lake. And so he took a very deep plow and just, without any permissions in this archaeological zone, he just plowed it all up. And we were very concerned about things that he might include in this plowed area. Here is a section of a wall, for example, just destroyed. And this is just one small area. There's a much larger area over there that he plowed up. And then there are these things, and there are dozens and dozens of these recently excavated small holes, which are all over the site, and I believe that it's from metal detecting. So someone brings a metal detector and gets a reading on it, telling them that there's metal below the surface, and they start digging. And sometimes it's just small areas like this. And by the way, Yorgo here is pointing out a little bit deeper hole, but again, one of many. And notice little Anastasia is helping point out the hole as well. So in other areas, it's much wider disturbance of the surface. So this is an area of about 5 meters by 5 meters, just churned up, looking for metal objects. Other places are much deeper, but they're everywhere over the site. Very disturbing. Well, that's bad enough. And I suppose much of the information can be recovered and signs can be repaired, but what's been done to this cave that I'm going to talk to you about is impossible to repair. The cave is situated, as I said, on Mount Oligyrtos. Here's the lake, and Phenios over here, Phlius over here. It's way up in the upper slopes of the mountain at an altitude of about 1,500 meters, whereas the valley here is about 600 meters. So it's isolated, and you can actually see it from a satellite image. There are routes in and out of the valley. Here are two of the routes to Phenios. Here's one of the routes that goes from Stymphalia over to Orchomenos, and another of the natural routes leading to Phlius and Alea. There is really no natural path that would lead up to this cave. It's a tough climb, and here's the way that I've gone up on the 4 occasions now that I've made this trip, and it's not an easy trip, from Lafka. So we actually drove halfway up and then walked from there, and even then it took us an hour and a half, and my legs are not going to be able to take it anymore. So that, I think, was my last trip up, but it is a wonderful experience, and in some ways you get the feeling of what it was like for a worshiper going up from the valley into this bowl amongst the peaks to bring an offering and become a devotee of the cult. Here once more, a satellite image of the, whoops, I'm going the wrong direction here. Right, the cave, which was visited first of all by Christos Piteros, and he brought back some samples from the cave surface in 1994 and published an article. I'm not clear, and I'll find out tomorrow, whether he made a second visit up there in 1998 and brought back some more samples. He published a second article in the Archaeology Deltion in 1998, and I haven't had a chance to consult yet. But in any case, he calls it Terrapota because there are in fact 3 basins, 3 bowls in amongst the mountains. This is one, this is the second one, and there's another one further down. And so our friend Yorgos Regopoulos calls this the Meseo Rupato. And I'm now using that term instead of Terrapota. So it's clearly visible there, and in fact, the cave was created because it is the Katavothros. It's an emptying spot for the water that gathers in this bowl. And so there's a chasm that's been created, and a good amount of rock has been eaten away over the years from this function. I want to mention this as well while I have the image. Way over here on a spur on the northeastern slopes of Oligyrtos, there is a castro. It's fortified. The date of the fortification, well, Yannis, perhaps you can enlighten us afterwards, but there is a foundation there that I think is classical, and I'll come back to that. Okay, so here's what it's like walking up, and this is the easy part. We're through the most difficult part, a place where I think goats would have a tough time going. But we'll see that the looters at this cave must have found an easier way than our guide has, because we'll see one of the objects that they carried up in order to assist in their looting of the cave. Another view, really gorgeous view from up there, but the rocky path is treacherous the older you get. Here's the cave. It's really more of a rock shelter than a cave. This is the first time I visited it in 2000. Peter Ross described the trench that he saw the looters made in 1994. He says it was 15 meters long, 3 meters wide, and from 2 to 2.5 meters deep. And a quick calculation will tell you that that's close to 100 cubic meters of soil that they excavated here. It's a huge amount of dirt, and you can't do that in a day. It was a prolonged, persistent excavation, and there must have been good reasons for them to return time and time again. So this is 2000, and if you see all of the greenery that grows up here in the cave, here you can see 2001, so the very next year, they were back and they dug a new pile of rocky material here and another one over here. So working away, and here's just a close-up to give you a better idea of the cave. It's about 50 meters wide, about 30 meters deep, perhaps 20 meters high, but there's more to it than you can actually appreciate from the surface, as we'll see in a moment. And here's our local guide, Yorgos, who immediately, in going up to the cave, after delivering us safely, he starts looking at the surface material to see what the looters have left behind. So Lavinia and I were up at the cave a little less than 2 weeks ago, and Lavinia took these pictures. Extension cords with the power cables, pots and pans for meals. There's a spotlight here on its side, and here's the electrical generator. Carrying this heavy generator up that hillside, and then leaving it here in a side cave, it is a real cost to them, both in money and labor, to get that up there. But again, they were being rewarded by what they were finding. And unfortunately, it's gone. We don't know. What I can show you is some of what they left behind on the surface. Here it just gives you an impression of the depth that they've excavated and tossed material back in spoil heaps. So this is a picture that was taken by Yorgos in March of 2020. He went up there by himself, and they were in the midst of their excavation, their looting, at that time when he was there. He didn't see them personally, but there are the tools lying right on the side of their trench. They've got a rope set up to lower themselves down, and a rope to pull this bucket with the dirt out of this deeper hole that they were digging. Well, here's Lavinia and I before going up, and you have to walk through this beautiful spruce forest first of all, and then up the rocky part. I'm not sure if this or this is where we had to head, but in any case, an hour and a half of heavy slogging. And this is our guide, Yorgos, up at the top. I don't know why I'm smiling there, maybe just because I made it. Yorgos is like a goat. For him, it's not a problem. So this is how it looked 12 days ago. So a year and a half after that March excavation, they did leave some tools behind. They've left the ropes behind, but the foliage is growing in. And here is Lavinia with a little bit of assistance from Yorgos, lowering herself into the hole that they pursued in this trench. And it's a deep hole well into the chasm at the back of the cave. So getting down a little further, wondering whether it's worth it. And a little bit further. And at this point, we were all praying that there wouldn't be a cave-in. But it all worked out nicely, and Lavinia took pictures for us, including this one into the very deepest part that they had reached. So this is a shovel that Lavinia tossed into this hole, and then she couldn't retrieve it. It was too deep. A little mark there where it hit the rock at the back, and she tells me that it continued a little bit to her right. It's also possible that it filled in with so much dirt that it could go deeper. They dug, again, so much soil, and we can only speculate what drove them on to continue digging here. So Peteros published these 19 objects in 1994. These are all terracotta figurines. Well, not that one. These ones. Very typical of the site. Here are some miniature votive vases. I'll show you more. Some trinkets and jewelry over here. A nice fibula, some finger rings, glass beads, and these typical kind of rosette, bronze rosette, and this very unusual object, which unfortunately, and maybe it was the looters who did it, knocked off a couple of chunks because those chunks had letters on them. So 15 minutes of pawing around the surface, just the surface of the material that the looters left behind. And this is what Lavinia and Yorgos came up with. It's a little bit difficult from this perspective to identify things, but I'll show you in more detail just how rich the leftovers are. Here are some things, pictures that I took from 2000. So again, we did a little bit of surface surveying to get an idea of what the objects were. These are mostly votive miniatures. This is 2001, where I decided to use a blue background. These are pendants for a necklace, a lead wreath typical from Sparta, all kinds of bronzes for decorating perhaps wooden boxes and things, and an iron hinge. more of these pottery. Again, I'll show you the details, but it's just scattered all over the surface. And again, from 2000, just a selection of things that I left behind. I had no permit to do any work here. I left it behind. Doesn't mean that Yorgos left everything behind. So I'll admit that, and thank heavens, because if it wasn't for Yorgos protecting the things that he was able to find in his museum in Lavka, it would be, well, anyone could come by and take it. So these are all terracotta figurines. Once again, just a quick surface collection. Some inscribed objects, but not too much of interest. You can read that someone was practicing their alphabet and got to A, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and then stopped. Someone wrote Anethike, so dedicated, and this is just an epsilon. But over here, someone took the time and the care to write what I think is their name on this bronze shield, and unfortunately there are crucial pieces missing, but here perhaps a sigma, omicron, perhaps a nu, over here is a nu, omicron, here's a proper sigma. I'm not sure what that letter is. Anyway, lost. And I suspect the looters knocked those crucial pieces off. This is probably the nicest find. Someone brought it over to me and said, is this anything? It looked like a sardine tin that had been unwrapped, unrolled. So we took it, this is the one object that we really wanted to protect. So we took it to our conservators, who carefully unrolled it, and I did this drawing of it to show you. It's severe style, early classical, of a youth holding an object in his hand, which I take to be a flower blossom, something like a lotus. Finger rings, George found this, it's in the museum. It's a running deer. Here's another finger ring that Peter Ross recovered. It's in the Nemean Museum, and you can see it's a warrior looking like he's leaning on a spear. Bronze fibula, more of these rosettes. This thing for a necklace, kind of a double axe. Glass objects, I'll show you a better view of that. Here's an iron pin. We always think of iron jewelry as susceptible to rust. Well, it is. And it is rusting, but it has a bronze cap or decorative pin. Here's some of the glass. Pottery, just tons of pottery. Nice pottery, pottery that's being imported, being brought from Athens and Corinth. And I'm even going to show you a couple pieces that came from Sparta, just because I'm interested. Okay, so it's typical of these terracotta figurines that they are mature women, commonly seated on a throne and wearing very elaborate necklaces, often also with a polos on their heads. More examples of these figurines, sometimes holding doves, but other times holding a flower, something like a lotus. So there's one here, there's another one here, and there's another one over here. So those are the most common objects that these females are holding. Geometricizing horses, although I'm sure that it doesn't go back to the geometric period. There's no geometric pottery. And these strange objects, I have no idea really what they are. I'm suggesting brazier handles. Perhaps they're just the legs of larger horses. So just a collection, I was sorting some of this material, thousands and thousands. These are fineware sherds. I haven't done anything with the domestic local pottery at all. Here, 276 bases from these miniatures where they are at least 50% preserved to give you a kind of minimum number of vases from the site. To be honest, there are thousands. This is the earliest of the pottery, Corinthian black figure, so it gives us a date, probably the first half of the 6th century, maybe even the first quarter of the 6th. Athenian pottery, both black figure and some interesting red figure pieces. Here's the Laconian, nothing to get too excited about. Eugene and I will be interested, since it's from Sparta. This is a very unusual vase. It's unique from the material that I saw. It's white ground, so it's got this white background. It's black figure, and it's a plastic vase. So it's not a typical vase that's thrown on a wheel. It's shaped. And here's just a drawing I did. There's a dancing woman, her arm here. There's a dancing man over here, which is appropriate for a drinking cup or a drinking vessel. So I show you these just to get you excited about the kind of object that this was when it was brought up and dedicated in the sanctuary. These are black figure and red figure, but they're the kind of plastic drinking vessels that Athens was producing in the 6th and 5th century. Corinthian conventionalizing, probably the most common type of fine wares. And here are the two gems amongst the fine wares that I was able to look at. One is this Corinthian or Sicyonian red figure crater. Just take a look at the drapery of this female figure, probably a seated female figure. The painter has elaborately decorated this garment that she's wearing. And Ian McPhee, who looked at this one, was really helpful in identifying the scene. It's an extremely rare myth that's depicted here. It's almost never found in Corinthian red figure, but here is one of the Furies behind perhaps a shield. You can see this white snake wrapped around her head. There's another white snake here curled around an empty scabbard. Here is a column, and you can see the hand of a male figure who's standing behind the column, who must be Orestes, who's trying to escape the Furies after Orestes murdered his own mother, Clytemnestra. So the pursuit of Orestes by the Furies. If only we had the rest. And if it's in the backfill of the looters, just in itself, I think it would be worth trying to locate it. I would hate to think that the looters have walked off with the rest of this phase. Okay, so the rest of this I'm going to read because I want to get it right, and Yannis is here to listen carefully at what I have written. This is washed out, unfortunately. I was supposed to show you a walk from Gura up here. This is Phenios, across the valley, Phenios, here's Gura, and there is a kind of valley or gap in between a group of mountains here, including Mount Sepia and Trikrena, and Mount Kylini here. And it's this route that Pausanias, I think, walked in going from Phenios to Stymphalia. So Pausanias seems especially well informed and interested in the border between the valleys of Phenios and Stymphalis. He must have traveled along the most commonly used route between these two city-states, between Mount Kylini and Mount Sapia, because he describes several markers along the way and even notes on which side of the border between the two polis each lay. So this is the satellite image, and on your right you see the description from Pausanias as he's going along. And I've numbered them here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so leaving from Phenios, he first mentions the sanctuary of Demeter, just 15 stades, or about 3 kilometers from Phenios, presumably eastward. Next along the border, but still in Pheniatic territory, he notes 3 springs called the Tricrena, where the newly born Hermes was washed by the nymphs, number 2. This is followed by the grave of the Arcadian king Emeritus, son of Elatus, at the foot of Mount Sapia, where Emeritus was bitten by a viper, so 3 and 4. He doesn't say on whose territory this grave monument rested. Next he comments on the temple and statue of Hermes on top of Mount Kylini, number 5. And I didn't put it right on the very top. In fact, I don't know if he literally means on top of the mountain, but I suspect not, since I've been to the top of Mount Kylini 5 times and never found a temple foundation. 5 paragraphs later, Pausanias notes that the boundary between Phenios and Stymphalis is Mount Geraldion, number 6. But this runs north-south for a long way, and in fact runs into Mount Sapia and Mount Tricrena. It separates the 2 valleys and may have marked a long division between the 2 city-states. But it doesn't necessarily mark the border along the route that Pausanias took along the east side of Mount Geraldion. Here we can place the points of interest described by Pausanias. So numbers 1 to 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And 4 continues here because this is the spine of Mount Geraldion. We can, however, add 3 more points of interest not mentioned by Pausanias, but surely important for marking boundaries between city-states in the area. Number 5, which is located up here, is the Cave of Hermes, so-called Cave of Hermes. Number 6 is this fortified castro, and number 7 is our cave at Meseo-Hupata, whose looted contents I've described already. These then together suggest an additional importance for the 2 cave sites and the castro, along with Pausanias' markers as border points. In other words, the limens of Stymphalia, or border markers, distinguishing the territory of one polis, maintained and controlled by individual polis, with divinities specific to the polis, controlled by the site. So this is just the root of Pausanias, and this is what I suggest to be the imprecise borders marked by these various religious and grave sites. Well, here Mount Geraldion, but here the cave, and here that spur. This is the mouth of the Cave of Hermes, and just by coincidence, this fellow who took me up and showed me where the cave is, where Hermes is supposed to have been born, was named Pan. And for the sake of honesty, I'll tell you that, whoops, that was my mistake. It was really Panayotis. But as far as I was concerned, he had the personality of Pan, Panos. So that's the Cave of Hermes. The Germans have recently done a lot of work there and published their discoveries from the cave. Here we're going back to the cave sanctuary again, and I want to remind that so many of the figurines of this Oligyrtos cave sanctuary depict women. One might suggest here the nymphs as the deities being worshipped, although they are commonly associated with springs or apparently deeper, narrow-mouthed caves at higher elevations. So the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite actually describes how the deep-breasted mountain nymphs mate in the depths of pleasant caves, but at their birth, pines or high-topped oaks spring up with them from the fruitful earth. Beautiful, flourishing trees towering high above the lofty mountains. So the setting of this Meseobupato cave, set in a basin above the wooded slopes of Mount Oligyrtos, fits the description nicely, and in general it's the nymphs who most often attract worship in caves. On the other hand, the deep hole found by the looters at the back of the cave and the many bejeweled, seated female figurines lend some credence to Peteros's suggestion that the cave was the home of female deities, Chthonian deities. Imagine climbing high up onto the mountain in order to access the underworld. But then again, the river Styx is also found high up on the slopes of nearby Mount Arkadia. So who knows? The river of the underworld. 3 or 4 polis whose borders touch on Mount Oligyrtos' slopes, Stymphalis, Phenios, or Komenos, perhaps also Caphii. My own bias is in thinking that the cave came within the sphere of Stymphalian territory, and one contributing factor to that bias is the location of this small fort, the so-called castro, built on the spur of Mount Oligyrtos, high on the north side, which overlooks the Stymphalis Valley from every direction. Its position strongly suggests that it belonged to the Stymphalians, and from there it might also serve as a post from which the cave site on the upper western slopes of Oligyrtos might be accessed by so-called peripoloi, or patrollers of city-state territory, if such existed at the time. Here, Matthew Schaus and I are sipping lattes, generously provided by Yorgos Reopilos, from which he also then took out his cell phone and phoned Yanis Lolos just to say hello. So it kind of ruined the atmosphere of this ancient fortress high up on the hill. But you can see in the background the view across the valley of Stymphalis. The site includes a foundation for a small structure built of ashlar blocks, indeed perhaps a temple, which with its drafted edges suggests a classical date. It's possible that the popularity of the cave sanctuary declined after the move by the Stymphalians to their new urban location beside the lake, especially if the new site was at a greater distance from the cave. At first glance, the two events appear to be relatively synchronous. The cave, which you see once again over here, produces a religious experience. And this religious experience of worshippers at cave sites in Greece generally has recently been the subject of study and considerable speculation. Ideas have been proposed concerning sacred space and ritual action, liminality, the sensory dimension of cognitive enhancement within the dark isolation of cave environments, the illumination of numinous karstic phenomena creating locations for manifestations of religious behaviors. And I quote here an MA thesis by Nadine Pierce from McMaster University. The cognitive fuses with the sensory to inform a wide spectrum of collective or individual religious experiences. So imagine yourself high up on the mountain, approaching the cave and the darkness of the cavity. Your mind, in some ways, trying to grasp this, the importance of this sacred space, and at the same time, your perceptions are excited by the darkness, the sound, the view, by the belief that this special cave may be the dwelling place of these spirits. Although the cave at Oligyrtos is more a rock shelter than the gloomy and foreboding cave of common imagination, its isolation and sunken location within a rocky bowl with broad vistas along the edge of the bowl across valleys and mountain peaks surrounding it offers the visitor an experience with both impressive sensory and cognitive dimensions. It attracted considerable local attention for a period of perhaps 200 years, and then suddenly lost its appeal and seems to have been forgotten. This is a quotation from an article by Olma Cardete, and she mentions these rural communities and their changing power relations, especially in the period of big power, the growth of big powers. So it's you get these mountain cults that decline or change towards different realities. Mountains are no longer limits of human environment, but peripheral localities. So perhaps that's partly the explanation for what happened to this cave. Well, I want to close with this. And it's something that I haven't read anyone really consider in detail, but to me it was something that should be studied and considered, particularly in light of what has happened to this cave sanctuary with looters going up the mountain and for years plundering its riches. Without clearly identifying, so a separate question is the method by which the local community protected such an isolated and inaccessible sanctuary site, such as our cave site. Many valuable objects were obviously deposited here in the course of ritual practice, including jewelry, furnishings, carefully decorated vases. Modern looters now have regularly stripped the site of its more valuable objects. But the same could have been done in antiquity, without provisions made to keep the site secure. So, was it secured somehow for all of the wealth that was left here? The most effective protection might have been watchmen, but this would not be practical in wintertime, when deep snow, howling winds, and freezing temperatures would make living conditions difficult, even if a sturdy house were built in a sheltered spot for guardians. Simply building a high wall with a locked gate would not deter robbers for any length of time. Thorny bushes placed to enclose the site, stakes or booby traps could potentially help. And Minoan peak sanctuaries might be a place where we could look to see if we could find any measures taken to try to protect these sacred spots. In any case, the Minoan peak sanctuaries do not have architectural remains to suggest that they were somehow protected by walls. Despite serious damage to the site and loss of contextual information from long-term plundering, small finds from the cave sanctuary at Oligyrtos provide an important record of worship at this isolated but popular sanctuary for the 2 centuries of its existence. Clearly, valuable objects were being left behind as votives without any apparent safeguards to protect them. Yet they remained secure at the site until modern thieves discovered their existence almost 30 years ago and began pillaging that site. So.
Thank you. My legs are hurting me just looking at the height of this cave. Thank you for this very interesting talk. I'm happy that you spoke about the chronology there, because I was wondering, right? Because clearly saw that it's 64th century, and so this is interesting to see how these finally just are abandoned and people pass to something else. I was wondering about the earlier periods. I think there's no geometric, there's no early arcade.
All we've been able to see is what's on the surface of the looters' backfill.
Mm.
And it would be nice to have a controlled excavation and try to see if there is an earlier level. But no one's done it, and the looters are continuing to plunder the site. I must tell you that the police were alerted, thanks to Yannis, and they did visit the site. I didn't show you the very effective method by which they're hoping to protect the site. They brought up a can of spray paint, and they put an X, which may not deter many people, but then they found a goat's head skull and put it on a stick right beside the painted X, hoping that a little voodoo magic might help.
Do we have any questions for Gerald? Yes?
Oh,
Do you think there was a lot of gold in this cave to make it worthwhile for these people?
I believe there probably was. I didn't mention it, but we did find there was a silver earring that they weren't able to identify, no doubt just scooping dirt away. I don't have any doubt that there were gold objects, but whether that's what kept them going or whether it was simply antiquities of various kinds that they could sell on a market, I don't know. I just don't know. It's only all that much more frustrating to see that they were being rewarded somehow for all of the work that they were putting in over the years. It must have been valuable enough. They were not looking for pottery.
Do we have any? Yes, please.
Nearby here is the theater, ancient theater of Hermes. Right. Is there any indication whereby there was some kind of a festival at Hermes in connection with the rituals in those caves?
It's one of the things I struggle with, to try to understand which city-state actually controlled, and beyond control, had devotees come here for festivals, special events. I can imagine that they were invited for special festivals from the neighboring city-states, including Hermes. In the end, one of the things that puzzles me is how the looters got that heavy generator up the hillside, because it wasn't the way I went. So if there's an easier way from Stymphalia, maybe, or maybe there's an easier way from Kaphii, or Homenos, or Phenios. But it's very isolated, and I don't know even what to look for unless you were to find inscriptions with a particular set of alphabetical, letter forms. I just don't know. Orchomenos is close, and it certainly was an important city-state. Phenios is even closer. I don't know. Yeah.
I just thank you, Jay. I just wanted to say that the reason I was interested in that cave is because we have another cave in the Sicyon area, which is not far from the borders to Stymphalia, and this is a cave dedicated to the nymphs, and it is also archaic, with going down to probably the late 4th century, and then it stops as well. So it has from the early archaic to the late classical, and then there's no evidence of worshipping there anymore. So it's something similar to what we have here. And just to say that it's a disgrace what has been happening in this very important cave in terms of material over the last 30 years and more. Just a shame.
It's happening in Crete as well, because at the Cave of Skotino, every time I go back, there are new holes. And I regularly go up to Tinisos area, and there's a sweet little cave right below a peak sanctuary, and both are being looted. And so it's just a common and sad problem, and I don't know what you can do. For Skotino, I reported the looting. I took photographs and sent them to the Arkadia. But this, they did put up a fence, but of course the gate's open, so anybody can walk through. But I had another couple of points. Episodic use of caves is typical in Crete. They come and go, or different parts of the cave may be used. We don't know, but there's clearly different breaks in the use of the cave, and that picks up later. Whether or not that meant there was a shift into another part of the cave that hasn't been excavated or looked at, who's to know until you do more work. But I found it interesting to see, what's happening in the late period versus the early period.
It's well, we say a crying shame, and there are times when I feel like crying when I see what's happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any other questions, remarks? Well, Jerry, thank you very much once again.